Reporting for Fox News Now.
All right, and from Pennsylvania back to New Jersey, I am joined right now by cannabis lawyer Mr. Charles Gormally, who is here to talk about really what is happening next now that New Jersey is the 13th state to legalize marijuana. Mr. Gormally, how are you? Thank you so much for joining us.
Great, thanks for having me back again, Regina. It's good to see you.
All right, well, Mr. Gormally, it was officially signed into action on Tuesday. So what happens now as far as the legalization of marijuana in the Garden State?
Well, just to set up the viewers, we'll recall that back in November, the Constitution in New Jersey was amended by the citizens of New Jersey at the ballot, where they voted on a 2-to-1 plurality to essentially create a regulated cannabis marketplace in New Jersey. But, you know, just amending the Constitution doesn't really accomplish the result. So it requires the legislature to get back to work. So since the election until just this Monday, the legislature and the governor have been working on legislation to essentially put into action what the citizens of New Jersey indicated they want. And that is, what framework is New Jersey going to have to allow people in New Jersey to access the cannabis marketplace. And that's the process. While the governor signed the legislation on Monday, is really just beginning. There is the process that now is in place going forward requires the creation and population of a new government agency, the Cannabis Regulatory Commission, which will promulgate a series of regulations that will guide the industry. It will instruct people who want to open a retail business to sell cannabis, for instance, how to go about locating that business, applying for a state license, and obviously all of the other variables that any entrepreneur wants to encounter when they form a business. They're going to have to deal with those as well. But the state is really just beginning the process, even though the legislation has been signed, in order to effectuate being able to purchase cannabis in New Jersey.
And, you know, Mr. Gormally, I think a lot of people have questions about the fact, you know, what does this mean as far as decriminalization? Can people get prior records expunged? As far as law enforcement goes, what does this mean for the state?
Well, Regina, you really put your finger on what it was that was slowing down the process since November. Grappling with taking a substance which has been a felony, to even just to possess it, let alone sell it or distribute it. Taking a substance like that historically has had tremendous law enforcement attention, and now converting it not only into a business, but in days of pandemic, it was deemed to be an essential business. There's a lot of hurdles that have to be overcome. So what the legislature and the governor have done is go back into our laws that had criminalized marijuana and have parsed those laws and essentially decriminalized the possession of marijuana. Now, to make things more complicated, there's actually 2 terms that we're going to be using in New Jersey. If you're talking about cannabis that you're going to be able to go into a dispensary and purchase, you're talking about cannabis. If you're talking about something you've gotten outside of the state program, that's considered marijuana. Now, that distinction seems to exist only so that the government can deal with the criminality, the potential criminality of possessing some forms of marijuana, meaning cannabis that's purchased or obtained outside the state program. So the real holdup was trying to reconcile, how is the government on one hand going to license businesses to sell cannabis, and then on the other hand, criminalize behavior of some folks who have marijuana. And there was a clash of really good intentioned folks to resolve the social justice issues that come about from this. And where it landed was essentially that possession of up to 6 ounces of marijuana is decriminalized, meaning that there's no criminal implication or a violation from somebody in possession of cannabis of that quantity. Same amount for hashish as well. There's certain limitations. So if you possess 6 ounces of cannabis in New Jersey since Monday, it's no longer a criminal offense. What that set in motion as well was, as you can imagine, while this was happening, meaning since the Constitution was amended, thousands of people were still being arrested and charged with cannabis and marijuana offenses in New Jersey. All of those cases have been sort of in suspended animation, knowing that the law was going to change. By virtue of the governor signing the law on Monday, the Attorney General in New Jersey has advised all the local prosecutors that all cannabis offenses that fall within the now decriminalized statute are going to be dismissed. So hundreds and probably thousands of these cannabis cases that were pending in New Jersey will be dismissed. In addition, there's an automatic expungement of any conviction that occurred for cannabis offenses. So some of these social justice issues, how do we correct criminal convictions that are on somebody's record for behavior that is now legalized, was what was really holding up the process. And I think now it's resolved and landed in a pretty good place. Not an uncomplicated place for police officers, though, and I think you're going to see a lot being written in the next few days about what our own expectations are for law enforcement. Because the real challenge comes when a law enforcement official finds somebody under the age of 21 in possession of marijuana. And all of those laws have been amended as well. So that's no longer considered criminal behavior, and people in that situation are going to get a warning. And if there's repeat behavior, they're ultimately going to get a summons for a civil penalty.
Now, Mr. Gormally, I want to clarify, because personally, I'm just a little bit confused as far as the law goes. People who were arrested for possession of marijuana prior to the bill being signed, now the bill has been signed, we're moving forward. How is it allowed that even though they were arrested or charged when it wasn't legal in the state, that they could now get that expunged?
Well, from the time that I think the real reason the legislature made that decision was in right after Election Day. Well, we may not have known who the president was, but we certainly knew New Jersey voted overwhelmingly to legalize cannabis. So I think the policy decision that was made by the government here was that if you have the citizens of the state declaring that possession of cannabis is appropriate under our Constitution, how can you have a state law that conflicts with that? So if somebody was charged with violating the state law after the Constitution was amended, it would have led to an interesting and time-consuming and really, frankly, irrelevant clash of, a battle between what the Constitution in New Jersey says and what the criminal statute provided. And ultimately, I think most of those criminal defendants would have been found not guilty because of the defense under our state constitution. So rather than litigating those cases, the governor determined and the legislature determined that if you've been charged with a cannabis offense, you're going to be getting expunged after the Constitution had been amended. Now, you still have thousands and thousands of people who have criminal convictions on their record for offenses that were committed prior to the amendment of our Constitution in November of 2020. Those folks will go through an abbreviated expungement process. But for the folks that committed an offense after the Constitution was amended, they're going to be automatically expunged.
Now, Mr. Gormally, talking about legislation, this is an entirely new chapter for the state of New Jersey. Is there going to be a specific legislature made to just specifically deal with cannabis laws?
Absolutely, and the devil is going to be in the details. And what we always tell clients at the firm is that don't just worry about what the law, the state law or the statute says. Most of our regulated businesses in New Jersey, and particularly healthcare is a perfect example, it's not just what the state statute says, it's what the regulations that the agencies that enforce these laws, when they promulgate regulations, they really control the day-to-day activity and sort of the fine details of operating a cannabis business in New Jersey. So what we anticipate in the coming months, over the next 6 months, is the Cannabis Regulatory Commission. That's the name of the state agency in New Jersey that will regulate the licensure of businesses and the production of cannabis within New Jersey. That state agency first has to populate itself. Right now, it only has a few folks that are commissioners. And then it has to start the nitty-gritty process of formulating regulations. This isn't the first time it's been done in New Jersey. Your listeners will recall that we have had a fairly robust medical cannabis program in New Jersey, and that went through the same process. The law was adopted by the legislature, and then the Department of Health promulgated regulations to guide the industry where you can locate these businesses, how they have to be secured, what type of inventory controls these businesses have to have, and what type of inspections the state will impose on those businesses periodically. We'll see the same thing happen in the recreational cannabis marketplace. We would expect the Cannabis Regulatory Commission to specify locations that you're not allowed to have cannabis businesses, for instance, within 1,000 feet of a school. I picked that only because I know that's a regulation on the medical cannabis side. But there's hundreds of details that will go into the regulations that we would expect to come out. And those are the regulations that really will guide and develop the industry, including, and perhaps most importantly from the state standpoint, how is tax going to be levied? Now, on the transactions involving cannabis in New Jersey, the Constitution was amended and allowed the state to collect a sales tax, a regular sales tax, at the point of a retail sale. But we'll fully expect to see different levels of taxation imposed through regulations as cannabis moves through the production cycle, from seed through a grower to a processor to a distributor to a retail outlet. At each one of those levels, I would expect to see the state imposing some form of excise tax so that cannabis becomes a huge revenue developer, both for the state as well as the municipalities where these businesses are located.
Mr. Gormally, you and I spoke in November, actually, when voters first checked this off on the ballot and it was voted in, and now it's signed. In November, you were already getting so many calls from people interested in the cannabis market that was coming to New Jersey. So now it's officially here. What has it been like? How soon can businesses and dispensaries pop up in New Jersey? What is the latest as far as the business aspect of the legalization?
The interest level has been phenomenal, as you might expect, and it starts with the folks that are already involved in the medical cannabis marketplace. Some of these businesses operate in other states already. They're multi-state operators. I would fully expect, and based on the volume of calls we've been receiving, you'll see a similar thing happen, whether it be folks that are fully entrenched in the Colorado or California marketplace, or even the Canadian marketplace, formulating New Jersey businesses, finding earlier. The devil will be in the details about how the regulations that the Cannabis Regulatory Commission promulgates, how will that impact your own business plan? So any entrepreneur who wants to go into business, fundamentally the first and most important thing they need to do is develop their business plan. What part of the business are they interested in? And there are so many aspects of traditional businesses that are in simpatico with the cannabis business, meaning that there's many businesses that you may not get involved in touching cannabis whatsoever, but you'll be in a supportive role to a cannabis business. And I give you one simple example, although this one does involve touching the product: delivery services. We fully anticipate having the ability in New Jersey to be able to go on an online interface, establish a relationship with a licensed vendor under the New Jersey's cannabis program, and order cannabis online that would be delivered to your doorstep, depending on how robust the delivery services are, in a matter of hours. So, and this really is where I think most of the cannabis business is going to be conducted. View it as the Amazon effect of all businesses. We would fully expect retail outlets to do a robust business, but at the same time, folks who have no interest in going into a cannabis store will certainly have access to the marketplace online. So we tell folks, develop your business plan. Do you want to be on the delivery side of this business? Do you think you're a marijuana grower? Do you think you're interested in the chemistry of it, so that you want to be a processor to create cannabis products? Do you want to run a retail outlet? And everything in between. Once you formulated your business plan, we would anticipate, basically because everything that happens in the cannabis business in New Jersey has to begin and end in New Jersey. And by that, I mean, you can't import cannabis into New Jersey. It has to be grown here. Part of the really unique feature of cannabis businesses that have been developed in the states that have fully legalized is it's a purely intrastate matter. All business has to be conducted within the state. There's no crossing state borders. And the reason for that is, regardless of what's happened in New Jersey and what might happen across the river in Pennsylvania and across the other river in New York, regionally, we're really moving in a direction of liberalizing cannabis laws. That's obvious. Regardless of regional or state moves, on a federal level, it's still a Class 1 felony to possess significant quantities of cannabis, and it's a Schedule 1 drug. There's a couple of bills pending at the federal level now. Cory Booker is sponsoring one of them to open up cannabis at the federal level. That's the next real game changer for cannabis modernization, is going to occur at the federal level. Once that occurs, these businesses that have been happening in 13 fully legal states now, that have fully just been within the state borders, will open up, and you'll have a more traditional business. I usually tell folks it's sort of like the legendary Jersey tomato. Imagine if you could only get it in New Jersey, as opposed to being able to ship it reasonably into Pennsylvania and New York. Obviously, this is where the cannabis marketplace is going to go ultimately, but it's going to require a change at the federal level. But the interest level is phenomenal. But I tell clients, you have to have patience. It's going to take a business plan that's well funded, as well as the patience to wait for the availability of product. The single largest impediment to the growth of the medical cannabis marketplace in New Jersey has been the supply of cannabis. And that's just because the number of plants currently under cultivation in New Jersey has grown substantially. We've grown our medical cannabis business practice from 33,000 patients to now over 100,000 patients. But even at that, the shortage of product in these dispensaries is marked and market to see, and you can witness it when you go in these dispensaries. But the real impact that it has is it maintains prices at a high level. The object of this is to create enough supply in the legal channel so that the price gets to be below the price you would buy it in the black market. That's absolutely key, because until the consumer believes that they can buy a safe and cheaper product through the state and legal channels, there's still going to be avenues to purchase cannabis illegally because it's going to be cheaper, and in some cases significantly cheaper. Until the supply goes up, we won't be able to confront that problem.
All right. Well, a very informative segment here on the future of cannabis in New Jersey. Mr. Charles Gormally, thank you so much for your insight and for joining us here on News Now from Fox this morning.
Good talking to you, Regina. See you soon.
Absolutely. You have a great day, and we have a huge thank you, and we are so grateful to people like Mr. Gormally for joining us live here on News Now from Fox with this insight, because a lot of things are happening in New Jersey, in states across the country, and it's important, especially with a drug like Mr. Gormally was saying, it's important to know the due